with the super significant rise of digital direct marketing to consumers, it's like you didn't need to go somewhere anymore to be like, oh, if I could only get Walmart to give me 3 feet of shelf space, that is the key to pushing, 11 million units. Like now it's like, well, we'll make sure we have some discs if we even do,
Right,
and then
yeah.
the volume. And it's like now it's like, well, whatever. If Best Boy wants to sell some barcoded cards, we'll
Yeah.
let them put some cards at their register as something to catch people's attention. But when you don't need shelf, if you don't live or die by shelf space, a giant show trying to convince retailers to give you shelf space suddenly becomes like, that's where they all started going more public, right? And like
Right.
Gamescom, that's more about reaching out to consumers.
Come on, share their stories, experiences, and advice. And today I'm super excited. I have David Fifield, the general manager for Crytek's Hunt Showdown. So, what we do to start things off, we do 3 random questions to get the juices flowing. Are you ready?
Okay, I will take your random questions.
All right. Favorite place you've ever visited?
The Great Wall of China.
Oh, wow, that is cool. All right. Most interesting bar you've ever been to?
The Klimperklassen in Erlangen, Germany.
Okay. And then the last movie you saw?
Five Nights at Freddy's this morning.
There we go. And how was that?
It was fun. There's a lot of really cool tie-ins to the video game and its lore, and there was fun cameos from some of the like YouTuber theorists who play up a lot of what's not even in the game that people think and theorize about. So
Yeah.
that was good. My kids are really into it, so it was kind of a good morning out with them on the weekend.
Awesome. We found each other. I found you through a mutual friend, Games with Death, who'd been on the
Yeah.
pod, and he suggested you'd be a great guest and have a wonderful story to tell.
Well, I hope to live up to that high expectation.
All right. So, before you found, Crytek, and the gaming industry, what was your background?
Let's see. I don't know. I mean, I did a lot of different things. I did pen and paper board game kind of stuff way early on. Did a bunch of odd jobs as a kid, like lumber mill and picking tobacco and doing cucumbers.
Oh,
And
wow.
then joined the army at 17. I was a tanker and M1 Abrams tanks, and did that through Desert Storm. After the army, I did juvenile probation for a while. I
Holy
was
cow.
worked in a food warehouse on the night shift, and then that was when I started moving into video game testing and QA. Was my
Yeah.
first role, kind of really in the industry, and that was back in
Ah,
'97. And
okay.
and
Wow.
then yeah, that was the path into video games was
That's a
an
wild
erratic one.
path.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah.
And what, let's, first of all, thank you for your service. And what made
Oh, you're
you
welcome.
decide to enlist?
Just one of those things. Our family was pretty big on service. We had, generations of granddad and dad and folks who just served at some point, feeling it was a good thing to do, a good thing to give back, and it's good to serve folks, and it's good to understand how rough and difficult some jobs and ordeals can be, and definitely part of who I am and who our family has been.
Ah. And now, did you choose to be as in the tank crew, or it was just, it was there and you thought it'd be cool?
Actually, I originally, when I tested in on the ASVAB and did the language aptitude, I was originally supposed to go military intelligence. And then when I was at the MEP station enlisting, they have a thing that they will run there often where they're trying to fill out all their jobs that are short. So they might have promised you one job, but they
Uh,
bait and switch you to another. And they're like, hey, look, there's some problems. You can't ship out right away to go do the other one. But if you want to ship out right away, then you can take one of these.
yeah.
And then that list had things like missile tech and cook and forklift operator.
Oh
And
God.
I was like, I don't want to do any of these things. But armored cavalry was on there, and they just called it 19 series. So I could have been a Cav Scout, having picked 19 series, but I wound up being a Abrams tanker, which was 19 kilo. And
Okay.
the rest was history.
Wow. And now, something I always wonder, you said you were in Desert Storm.
hmm
How did the tanks fare to the sandy conditions? I heard, I hear the helicopters and the aircraft, it was just awful for them. How did the tanks hold up?
They had the Abrams tank has these three giant V-pack air cleaners, and they fill up with dust pretty fast. So that was a regular piece of maintenance that we wound up having to do is take out the air cleaners, and there's this giant, basically air wand you use to blow all the dust out of them,
Yeah.
and that was a very common chore that we had to do as part of tank service there. But then on the flip side of that, the tanks can see out with their 15 power scopes for 4 and 5 kilometers. So the maintenance might have been rough, but the tanks have a massive advantage in that kind of wide open, no visibility blocker kind of
Right.
engagement.
Absolutely. And what is it like to ride in an Abrams? Is it smooth, or is you thinking old school tanks where it's just like you back braking and not a whole lot of space in there?
I, I would say one of the things that the closest approximation is like when you're in a roller coaster that's going up a hill
Yeah.
and you have that kind of chank, 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 chank. Like, so there is a vibration to the tank, and the faster you go, the more that gets reduced. But that was the feeling that I would most equate it to is being in a roller coaster cart that's getting dragged up a steep hill.
Okay.
That's the sensation of the kind of tooth and gear and tracks, shaking the vehicle as
Yeah.
it goes forward.
Ah. And I also saw, towards the end of your military career, you were a trainer teaching tactics and whatnot, tank
Uh,
tactics.
yeah, or operations.
Yeah.
So after Desert Storm, and they kind of downsized our unit out of Germany, and we left all our tanks down in the desert in case there was any future trouble. Turns out there was.
Yeah.
So a bunch of Abrams tanks were already sitting there in warehouses. So they closed down our European base, and then I wound up going back to Fort Knox, now being a combat veteran, and then worked at the armor school as part of the crews that would teach people going through the armor school
Yeah.
tank operations, some level of tank tactics, gunnery, driving. Did a lot of the maintenance courses there too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And now, what we, not really going into politics or war, just from
Sure.
Ukraine and Russia, from how the tanks hold up with UAVs and drones. Do you think that has a big change on, future tactics with the use of tanks in future combat?
Yeah, I think all those things. I mean, unmanned vehicles, unmanned weapon systems seems like that's definitely a trend, and it makes all the sense in the world to me to be like, okay, don't put a human being there if a human being doesn't need to
Right.
be there.
Yeah.
So, I do think there's probably other messier parts when you're on the ground than when you're flying.
Yeah.
That would get into like, oh, well, you have to understand driving in mud can throw the track off, and you need to understand what the maintenance is like in that vehicle to the ground relation to the maintenance that has to be done on it.
Yeah.
So that's a piece there. I think the Abrams tank is a super impressive weapon of war. It's super durable compared to all other modern battle tanks, and that's there's if you're gonna ride a vehicle into combat, that's the one to ride.
Yeah. Now, how many people are in an Abrams tank?
For
Oh, okay. And is it like really cramped, or do you have a little elbow room to move around?
No, there's decent space. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's like anything, you get acclimatized to it over time. Like we lived on it 24/7 when we were deployed, and
Yeah.
so you get used to it. I guess is just how I'd put it. It's certainly cramped when you get all the hatches closed and everybody's inside, but
Uh-huh.
it's not like you can't move, and it's not like there isn't room to do everything you need to do, include jump out of the thing really fast if you
Yeah.
need to. So
Oh,
that's all possible.
all right.
Like small compact cars are more crowded and
Oh,
cramped
okay.
than a tank is. So like if you're riding around in a Prius, if you're riding around in a Chevy Volt,
Yeah.
that is more cramped than the inside of a Abrams tank.
Ah, all right. Very cool. All right. So talking video games. So sound like, earlier little conversation we had before we started recording, you do have some video game background. So, where did video games start for you?
Well, I mean, I started on Pong, like
Yeah.
I'm a child of the
I'm with you.
'70s, so that's like, so then yeah, our big debut moment of games at home would be like when we got our own 2600 under the
Yeah.
Christmas tree, so playing Atari 2600 games. Then moving into PC games and playing, text-based Planetfall and things like that.
Zork
Zork,
and
like
yeah.
yeah. So those, that's where I started in the late '70s, early '80s with video games and
Yeah.
computer games.
Yeah, the good old days of having to deal with IRQs and addressing your
Yeah,
to make sure the computer could work so you could play the game, and floppy disks. Yeah,
yeah,
kids
yeah.
these days don't know how good they have it.
Oh, indeed, for sure. Well, and if we go back to those systems, we also don't struggle to remember how it held our attention for 10 hours compared to what we have now.
Our days, Pong, that's a ball. We call that a ball, and a stick was that person or a tennis racket. And like you
Hmm.
tell that to people today, it's like,
Yeah.
that's a square. That is not a,
It's a
where do you think?
pixel. It's a pixel in a line. It's like, yeah, but
Exactly.
we played games with that pixel in that line.
What are some games that stick out to you, that, you look back, it's like, yeah, those were fun games.
I mean, transitional or meaningful games that like probably formed a lot of my impression of what video games are, or should be, or could be, would be like the MechWarrior 2. Was a big one on PC.
Yeah.
When you kind of made that transition to those cutting edge graphics, like the original MechWarriors and their cinemas, and it was always this trend that was cool that it's like the cinema for one game became the graphical level for the next game because
Yeah.
it never looked as good as the cinemas, but like the next game often looked just as good as the cinemas from the game before. And so MechWarrior was a big one early on. Metal Gear Solid, like that one, was another one that was pretty transformative for me on the PlayStation. And I had kind of a big break where I went from the 2600. Um, then I only had a little bit of time and a little bit of engagement with like the SNES and the Segas, which
Yeah.
is the generation behind us would be like that was their first system.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have a lot with those, but then like PlayStations and PS2s coming out was a thing.
Yeah.
Xbox launched the first year of my career, like where I was, in a professional capacity. And
Yeah.
so playing Halo on the original Xbox, and that's when I was also making MechWarrior 4 stuff. So then two iterations of MechWarrior, then the one that I got hooked on, as a fan was I was working on the MechWarrior 4 one for Microsoft. And so that was all kind of same time frame as PS2s and Xboxes coming out for the first time. Playing Xbox cooperative shooter on a
Mm-hmm.
couch on a TV, like that was a transformative experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are probably the earliest ones, and
Mm-hmm.
then along the way, the recent ones that might have caught me as strong would be like Hades and just everything Supergiant did with that, and
Yeah.
then watching it get built by a team of like 25 or 30 people, like I was just like, that's amazing,
Yep.
like what they did, how they pulled off such a world-class game, not necessarily with world-class tools and not
Right.
necessarily with a world's class size team, but definitely the quality, the heart, and the talent of those folks and what they put in.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of that challenged a lot of my thinking about what it means to make world class games when I
Mm-hmm.
played Hades.
Ah. And now you speaking of some iconic games and franchises, Halo, and I saw you were part of
Yeah,
Call of Duty, and now with
yeah.
Hunt Showdown. Um, what was your path along the way? You said you started out as a tester, then you worked your
Hmm.
way up, and then you're leading
Yep.
studios essentially. You're leading a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of team.
franchises. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the yeah. So I mean, that's the yeah. My path was first in QA. While I was in QA, the product was called Majesty the Fantasy Kingdom Simulator, my first kind of credited game,
Hmm.
and I started in QA for that. And that's interesting. Like when people will be like, "Can you talk to our high school students about how you got in the industry?" And I'm like, "Well, I saw a want ad in the back of a newspaper, and I hand wrote a letter to an address on that want ad in the newspaper that I got an answer. The answer came a year and a half after I had mailed it because they actually didn't even call me in for the first game. They wound up calling me in for a second round of testers they were hiring." And got into QA. And so then as I was doing the QA, was also watching that the product was short on levels. It wanted more level design done. It was kind of looking thin on content. And so learned the level design tool kind of in my own time.
Hmm.
Wound up making a bunch of pseudo levels that weren't like full levels, but kind of had three quarters of the functionality of the full levels. And then some people saw that stuff and were like, we could ship those with just one or two more widgets added into them. And so then we
Oh,
wound up kind of being instead of a campaign mission, these were like a skirmish mission is the kind of the equivalent. So wound up going as a QA person and then kind of getting credit for level design of these skirmish type missions. That led to then when we went to do the next one, I made a big jump they asked me to be a producer for the expansion set. So then it was like, okay, well, I was just QA and now I'm kind of a designer, but also kind of QA. And now we're talking about production and coordination and some
right.
management. And was like, well, that doesn't make sense. They're like, yeah, but you're the one person everybody in the company gets along with. And
Okay.
so being friendly, being approachable,
Yeah.
being communicative kind of just paid off then as they wanted me to be like the central point of everyone touching base and checking into that. So as a producer, started facilitating getting the games made, laying out the schedules, working in the spreadsheets and roadmaps, and then did that successfully for a while. And then the next jump up was when MechWarrior, we started talking with Microsoft about the MechWarrior 4 stuff and expansion sets they wanted done in the MechWarrior universe. And I had been a big MechWarrior nut, playing the lead miniatures, on
Yeah.
tabletop all through high school and middle school. So knew everything about that universe forward and backwards. So then that led to being a project lead for 4 different MechWarrior expansions. And just kind of leading by doing, having my hands in there, making
Mm-hmm.
things happen. And this is back when teams were 20, 25, 30 people, so
Yeah.
it was also a different time.
And now,
And from there,
were these teams spread out globally, or were this sort of like in a sort of one location?
no, that whole story there and everything we've talked about so far is all in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was Cyberlore Studios, and that was just one studio in there. Now, Microsoft, of course, was in Seattle, but they had contracted us as third party to, come in and do those expansion
Yeah.
sets and take MechWarrior a little bit further and do more content for it. So while they were doing a thing that would have been MechWarrior 5 if it had ever happened, we were continuing to expand MechWarrior 4, and then, that's where it was. But then my move out of that was, having done 4 MechWarrior 4 products for PC, I got the opportunity to go to console. So I was working on my first Xbox game on console to do Mech Assault, which is that universe's adaptation to go into, console land and play on a controller.
Yeah. And now after that, was that much of a jump going from developing a game or a product for PC now onto console?
I wouldn't say it wasn't like a rocket science level jump. It was actually really nice because you didn't have the wide compatibility challenges of like, what about this processor and what
Yeah.
about this video card and what about this kind of hard drive, and like just all of those things that PC games would have to face.
Yeah.
Extra hurdles was, well, now there's a defined first party and they have a bunch of regulations about everything you have to do. But we had great contacts at Microsoft. It was a Microsoft owned IP. And so all of that got us that extra special attention. And that also led to then Mech Assault being one of the first games to go onto Xbox Live. So, which I think they're even sunsetting that name now and calling it just Game Pass Plus or whatever.
Yeah.
But that very first console online network, which again, if you have been playing games for more than 20 years, you knew what a big deal it was when all of a sudden consoles were playing network. It was
Mm-hmm.
like we used to lug everything around in our cars to assemble in a basement or a gym to have to try and play a LAN.
Yeah.
And that was the only way you were playing these shooters PvP. So what that console meant to, PvP gameplay was massive. So being on Xbox Live, and that like one of the first 6 titles that came out for Live, Mech Assault was in that suite.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then you also had your hand in some Halo as well as Call of Duty as well,
hmm
correct?
hmm So yeah, then I had eventually, as after a couple of other jobs, the kind of military background combined, with shooter and PvP experience, and wound up in the Call of Duty business unit working on a lot of the multiplayer maps and a lot of map packs for different Halos, starting with like Black Ops 2 and then Modern Warfare, and just kind of bouncing back and forth between those franchises. I wound up leading again, kind of in a moment of like, hey, David gets along with everybody. Why don't you have him go talk to this other partner and stir up these other things? I wound up working on the Call of Duty Online
Yeah.
with Tencent in China.
Oh wow.
So doing the free to play version of Call of Duty. And so that was, I don't know, a good 6, 7 years of all Call of Duty, all about service games, all about the PvP stuff. Traveling the world. That's when I finally get to go see the Great Wall of China. It's
Wow.
kind of one of my bucket list items and attractions to get myself to one day up in Beijing. And then after that was Halo. There was a push to get Halo into be more PvP, more service, kind of that kind of emphasis. And so that was where I spent a few years at Microsoft doing that. Ultimately wasn't a strong fit, and so wound up moving on. A lot of that stuff did make it into Halo Infinite, or
Yeah.
was part of when I was there when I was doing the Halo 5 things. But just little proto thoughts or little moments there, and that wind up just becoming part of a franchise that
Yeah.
goes on and on and on. But there was the launch year for Halo 5. I was there for a year post launch doing all the online stuff as online experience director. They had like a season of content where every month had an update to Halo
Mm-hmm.
5, and we were making those things happen. So that was fun and exciting there for a moment.
Yeah. And now, when you went from, one AAA studio to the next,
Mhm.
was the process to develop the game similar, or every place had its own unique way of, developing their
Mm,
titles?
I would say it's maybe 70% similar.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of mechanical pieces that are just this is the way everyone does it, but then
Yeah.
there is a 30% difference that I think is like unto, movies can be made in a lot of different ways. Like
Yeah.
some people, can shoot it one way and some people will shoot it another way. Some are really scrappy indie film bootstraps, and then some are really, overly produced
Yeah.
extravaganzas of massive amounts of, logistics and everything else that goes into supporting it. So
Yeah. Now, seeing as how we're similar in age, we probably grew up with, Electronic Gaming Magazine and everything like that,
yeah, yeah,
watching, reading those. And what is your
yeah,
take on the industry? Seeing, from the days of E3 was the place you were going to see all the games,
yeah.
to what is sadly E3 is non-existent now. And it's like you're looking at, influencers, content creators and streamers, and even the gaming websites aren't the place to get the real reviews or takes. What's your whole
Yeah.
idea on that whole transition?
I mean, I don't think it's unfortunate. I think it's, just a very natural evolution, right? And it's the way I look at those shows and the way I think they existed is like E3 and a bunch of those really big conferences and those shows, they existed for pretty much one purpose, right? And they grew out of things like CES, Computer Expo
Yeah,
show or Electronics show, which was like to convince retailers to put your product on their shelf space,
yeah,
right? Like the fact that they let the public in, or the fact that, civilians or fans or
right.
even developers were there, that was all tangential to the people were spending millions of dollars on their booths or their
Yeah,
trailers or their presentation or having their things, because they were trying to convince retailers, like, give us shelf space to push this product,
yeah,
right? And so not only did we get that kind of transition, of like, oh well, people are doing less and less in person things, or COVID just coming in to shut down all such gatherings,
right.
with the super significant rise of digital direct marketing to consumers, it's like you didn't need to go somewhere anymore to be like, oh, if I could only get Walmart to give me 3 feet of shelf space, that is the key to pushing, 11 million units. Like now it's like, well, we'll make sure we have some discs if we even do,
Right,
and then
yeah.
the volume. And it's like now it's like, well, whatever. If Best Boy wants to sell some barcoded cards,
Yeah,
we'll let them put some cards at their register as, something to catch people's attention. But when you don't need shelf, if you don't live or die by shelf space, a giant show trying to convince retailers to give you shelf space suddenly becomes like, that's where they all started going more public, right? And like
right.
Gamescom, that's more about reaching out to consumers, um, and saying, "Hey, consumers, here's 100 stations. Come play the game. We're going to convince you once you leave here in this, crazy furor of, 100,000 people can't be wrong, so it must be worth attending, that you get
Yeah,
into this. And if you had to stand in line for 3 hours to play it, it must be special." Like all those things are. It's just about convincing a consumer, like, "Hey, you really should tell all your friends, and you should download this day one."
yeah.
But again, having early access on Epic Game Store or Steam or, the consoles, and being
Hmm.
able to just put things out digitally, you don't have to convince retailers, and that's what those multi-million dollar things were for.
Yeah. Gotcha. And now, speaking of like sort of E3 and COVID, where were you during COVID? Were you at Crytek still, or?
No, no, I was, yeah. So I have a very vivid memory of, I was at Crystal Dynamics. We had our Redwood City office, and I had a rental house down there. I also still have my house up by Seattle. In Washington, Crystal had also opened a Bellevue office, and so I was starting to transition to spend more time up in Washington State and less time in San Francisco,
Hmm.
and had been down there for a couple years, like as a resident, working right out of the Redwood City office,
Yeah.
doing Marvel's Avengers and
Oh
working on
wow.
projects there, and originally brought in to do some Tomb Raider things, but then I remember vividly that I had moved out of the California house and had pretty much had everything back in Washington, but I was down there on a visit. I had flown down to be down there for 2 weeks, and then I got the heads up because they told the businesses, like, basically they gave a 36-hour notice to businesses to be like, "We're shutting down all business in the counties,
Oh
like,
wow.
all up and down that area. So my boss had been like, "Hey, you need to get out of here. Everything's about to shut down." Just, at that point, maybe 24 hours ahead. So I had flown down and had a rental car that I had gotten from, SFO, and just, was like, okay, well, I've, been through other, I was around and dealing with traveling when there was, the 9/11 shut down
Mhm.
airports. And
Yeah.
so I was like, "Yep, I'm gonna get out of Dodge before they start locking highways down and stuff
Right.
like that." So we loaded up my rental vehicle, which fortunately happened to be an SUV, with like a couple dev kits, a computer, a bunch of other stuff. Hit a grocery store, filled it with food, and then also, so I was driving north across the San Fran Bridge when the alert went off on my phone telling everyone shelter in place, no
Yeah.
no public gatherings, and locking all this stuff down on March, I think it was March 16th. So yeah, so I was like, yeah, I called Hertz and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to return your car to SeaTac, not SFO." And so drove the rental car all the way up to Washington,
Wow.
returned it at SeaTac, and then hunkered down at my house.
Yeah. And what stage of game development or what game was being worked on for you at that moment in that sort of
Uh
that COVID area?
That was Marvel's
Oh,
Avengers that
okay.
we were looking, yeah, so that was right. It was, we were supposed to ship that year, like, so that's, we're talking, February, that was March 2020.
Yeah.
Our ship date was that summer, and it wound up, I think, delaying until September, but that was like, we had already gone to enough extensions and enough, long dates, and it
Yeah.
was it was the do or die moments there to be like, "We have to put this out now, these are the dates,
Yeah.
that's not gonna change." So then, yeah, we started into the super effort of like, okay, the hardest phase of closing this product down, we're also all going to do remotely now from our houses.
Oh my. And now what is the hardest, when you come to, you go from, concept to almost shipping this game out, what is you're just talking about, what is the hardest phase of, delivering that game?
I mean, every game can be different, and service games are wildly different than premium box products.
Mhm.
So there isn't a pat answer to those, but it is frequently when you are going up against the dates where you're supposed to be saying, we are feature locked and we're not going to take more code or new features in. But then it's like, but the game would be so much better if you did. But it's like, but we'll never make it stable if we do. So you're always having to run that hard debate. And then the content lock where you're like, but this will make the game so much better. And it's like, you could also destabilize it and risk everything by introducing crashes. And so that phase of, yes, the thing that people are proposing that we do would make things better, or the thing that isn't ready and saying we're going to cut this out and not even ship with it, like those, I consider that one of the harder parts,
Yeah.
because management is agonizing over, oh my god, how, it feels like wasted work if we didn't do this. Maybe we had 6 months tied up in this feature, like
Right.
literally could call this a $1 million investment that we're saying we're just not going to ship that because we don't think it'll be stable or ready. Like,
Yeah.
that hurts, that's hard. And then you have all the people who made that and they've been working on it, and you're telling them, yeah, thanks for trying, but that's not going to ship.
Yeah.
And then, so I consider that the hardest part,
All
that I
right.
wind up going through.
And actually, you just sparked something of like, back in the sort of early 2000s, releasing a game then, it had to be solid. You couldn't really rely on
No patches.
patches.
There
Yeah.
was no patches. Yeah, day one patch is the thing that so many of us are like, "What is that even?" Like, right?
Right.
Like, we were used to Gold Master is it. The only thing that people are ever gonna experience is what you put on the Gold Master disc, and if you were lucky and you really needed to patch something, or you felt like your game needed a patch, you'd be lucky if like 15 to 20% of your total user base ever downloaded that patch.
Yeah.
So most people are going to judge you based on whatever was in the disc that, again,
Mhm.
they bought because a retailer at E3 said, "I'll give you shelf space." And that's the only interaction, because like, we started when games didn't even have the internet,
Yep.
right? Like, in that, email was just coming into fashion.
Yeah. And now today it's, the sort of that joke, oh, it's beta,
Yeah.
and beta goes on, and when is a
Yeah,
most
even that open beta, Fortnite's
right.
still open beta. Like, wow, that's cool. Make billions of dollars for 6 years, but you're still open beta. Got it?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
It's wild. Yes, yes, and then you ended up going to Crytek. Now, were you familiar with Hunt before Crytek, or were you a fan
yeah,
of the
that
game?
was.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I had about 750 hours into Hunt
Oh
before I
shoot.
even spoke to Crytek. Yeah, and so that was, Crytek was a very deliberate conversation that I had because I was a super fan of Hunt, and
Ah,
so,
okay.
you know, I, came up through, Halo and those shooters, came up as a Call of Duty player, became a Call of Duty developer. I had moved on recreationally to mostly playing Fortnite, like 1,500 hours. Apex, I probably had 700 hours. Titanfall 2, a few hundred hours, not nearly as much as Apex. But then when I started kind of getting into researching and considering what these extraction shooters were like, found Hunt, and I just absolutely fell in love with Hunt, and I started playing Hunt to kind of the exclusion of everything else.
Oh,
And so
okay.
then there was this moment in 22 where I was like, okay, what am I doing next, and what do I want to do? And that was like, well, if I could work on anything, if I could just go for like my absolute favorite game, it was Hunt. And
Yeah.
so that wound up leading to a conversation with the CEO here at Crytek. And that became like, well, here's my 5-year plan of what I would do if I was running that franchise.
Hmm.
And he really liked that plan. And so, yeah, then, wound up joining last July, taking on that general manager role for the whole franchise. And
Yeah.
then now, when I joined, I had that like 750 hours, and I'm at like 2,400 hours now.
Oh,
So,
wow.
have piled up another 1,700 hours in the last year and a half. So,
Holy cow.
on average, I play about 100 hours of Hunt a month.
Here's the general manager coming in. The devs are like, okay, do we even have somebody who knows how to play the game? It must be
Hmm.
nice for them to have somebody who's familiar with the game, who's got hours into it, to come in and now work with them to make it a better game.
Yeah, I mean that's what they say, and I
Yeah.
think it can also be a double-edged sword because it can be both a, oh well, this executive gets it, so they don't have to explain to me the importance of a core feature not changing, or they
Right.
don't have to explain to me if somebody would be like, we need to just take this out, like an executive might have a crazy whim. It's like, well, I wouldn't suggest a thing like that unless I deeply understood how it was going to affect that core experience of core players.
Yeah.
So that's nice. I think on the flip side, though, it can be like being a deep super fan, I can also have my own personal bias.
True.
And so then it can be like, is this actually also representing what's best for the game or best for the biggest audience, or is this just what David wants because he's
Right.
a
Yeah.
super fan, right? And so that's a thing that I have to check myself on, and people have to check me on. And, sometimes that's not pleasant to tell your boss you're wrong or
Right.
things like that. So
Yeah.
it's a double edged sword, but, so far I'd like to think it's more good than bad
Yeah.
that I have, the 2,000 hours in
Absolutely.
and know all the subtle pieces here and there. And I think
Hmm.
some of that too that it can be good, I think, for the fans, but then sometimes with the staff that we have to talk about is there's a lot of people who love Hunt on the team. There's a lot of people who play hundreds, thousands of hours,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are super, super good at it. And so then they have a great voice for that top end 1 or 2% player who are the best players, and then I'm very average at it. I'm
Yeah.
very middle of the road average stats. I am not above, like maybe I'm a little above average, but for anyone with 2,000 hours, I'm below average. For the average player, I'm a
Hmm.
little above average. But that's like, so I'm speaking to the like, what about the people who aren't great at aiming or don't have lightning
Right.
reflexes and, don't have the best visual acuity of a 20-year-old,
Yes.
sharpshooter? And so, then representing that different part of the audience there too.
Yeah.
So but it's good that we can talk about it as the game is played and what it actually means, and I can understand the ramifications of adding or cutting things
Yeah.
from the game.
Absolutely. And now people say, Hunt has one of the best audio systems around, and
Hmm.
Hunt's a great blend of PvP, PvE, the immersion. In your opinion, what sets it apart from other titles in that space? What does Hunt
Yeah,
have?
so I mean, the pithy marketing phrase I use is, the heartbeat of Hunt is the exquisite tension of the pervasive unknown. And so it's like we don't just put everything in front of you to show you everything. You don't
Hmm.
have, a mini map with red dots and blue dots. You don't have red outlines on your enemies. You don't have like all the information you could ever want about how to like navigate and play out. You don't see health bars over other people,
Yeah.
and how all that stuff goes. So there's a lot of unknown stuff, and then you have to tune into like where are the other players? You don't even know because it's not like there's A spawn and B spawn and you're running at a deathmatch. It's like they could have spawned anywhere.
Right.
And it's not like you dropped out of a helicopter or a bus and you can be like, well, I saw a bunch of people flying that way, so I'll fly this way. It's like you just don't know where they are. They could be right beside you. They could be across the map.
Yeah.
So that's one part. The fierce lethality is another one that sets it apart. Like we don't have shields, we don't have body armor.
Right.
You're one shot away from dying, all the time, and that's another thing that every bullet counts. Like there's just there's a lot of challenge to it. It's, it's definitely something you have to lean into and acquire, because other games, other shooters, you're typically going to go in, and if you just through persistence keep spraying bullets, keep charging down a hallway, even if you're bad at the game, you're going to get a few kills in your first 10-20 minute game. And
Yeah.
certainly if you played 30 minutes of gaming, you're going to get a few kills in there, maybe 4 or 5, and then feel like, okay, well, I got 4 or 5 kills. I got killed 50 times. I'm not good at this game. Like, you can play Hunt for a couple hours and not get your first kill.
Oh, I did. I
Right.
was playing with death, and I did.
Yeah.
It was a while before I got my first kill.
First, right, exactly. So that's just different, right, than
Yeah.
other shooters where you'd be like, "Hey, got him. He came through the door, and I burned him with my SMG." This is
Right.
like, well, I saw a guy, and you start celebrating. I hit him with one bullet. Yeah, that's an improvement. But it's like, yeah, then he blasted me, and I died. It's like, okay, but then that next game is like, can I string 2 bullets together and maybe put somebody down? And unless those 2 bullets hit in the chest, you're not putting him down. And so then
Right.
it's just, so that challenge, that difficulty, that's something that sets it apart. The pervasive tension, the fear, the horror, the time period, and the monsters. It's like, there are cowboy games, there are zombie games, there are even cowboy zombie games, but not a lot of them. But there aren't, PvE cowboy zombie
Yep.
games, and so we kind of have that as that niche there. But even beyond the niche, it does keep growing, and that's what's interesting to me, is just there's more people who get into it, and at first will be like, this is really hard, but then when you kind of shoulder into like, but I want to understand it, or I really like the setting, or my friends play it and keep swearing by it, there comes a moment when you do start feeling like, yeah, this is like no other shooter, and it's kind of the shooter I want to play.
Yeah.
And so we have an interesting dynamic with our audience over time like that.
And now, as a general manager, what falls under your umbrella for the whole game?
There is no aspect of Hunt as a franchise that doesn't fall under me. So all the publishing, all the marketing, all the data, all the business, all the development, like all of that
Yeah.
is, if it has to do with Hunt, then that's under my umbrella
Yeah.
as the general manager,
All right.
for it.
And now it seems like in the last year to 18 months to the last year, it seems like Hunt has, sort of gone even more successful than it has in the
Mhm.
past. And what do you attribute that to? Do you think it's the, hooking in the, creators, the influencers and things
Mhm.
like that, and pushing, getting them on board and excited and helping, working with them?
I think the main thing that we did is we took our events and we got much more focused on what it means to have an event and having the battle passes.
Yeah.
Like, so that was, and Hunt for a long time, I think, was going back and forth between a mentality and a development team that had always made premium box products to being like, well, let's make it kind of like a service, put it in early access, and keep finishing it. But even then, for a few years, there was a focus that was like, well, here's a premium game that we haven't finished yet that we put in early access, and we're going to finish it alongside the fans playing it. And then that kind of led to like, well, we're kind of finished with what could be called a premium game, but let's keep adding stuff into it. And that's where it kind of became a service.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't super deliberate as I saw it from the outside, and even as I've kind of analyzed it since coming in. So then starting, a year and a half ago, is a much more deliberate focus on like, we are definitely a service. And the team had already concluded that before even engaging with me. But then it's like, to be a service means having events, but then that could become also just make a completely new, wildly different event each time with brand new mechanics. That's a lot of work to implement, and a bunch of new UI screens. And what we started doing with the events like Devil's Moon and the Battle Pass with Serpent's Moon, and then moving on to Tide of Shadows, was like, well, we want to standardize a lot more what it means to be an event, standardize what a Battle Pass is instead of having different progression and reward systems constantly. And so I think a bit of that standardization, going into that concept of having the events, also let us do some pretty radical changes to gameplay, like
Mm-hmm.
with the packed traits and things that these are kind of scary if you were just saying we're changing how these traits work in the game, but to say we're introducing some temporary traits and you have to make a choice so that they don't all stack up on top of each other.
Yeah.
Like that was, I think, very central to the success of both Devil's Moon and Tide of Shadows.
Okay. And what's when you guys, I guess, roadmap something, what is that process like from like concept to actually getting it released? Do you target a certain period of time, or just roadmap it out and go from there?
We're always working on our production process, and like what you're describing there is a production process, and
Yeah.
so we're working to improve and tune that, and we have some really sharp people always proposing better ways to do business, and smarter ways to develop the content, and
Yeah.
so sometimes you would work backwards from we have to ship on this date, what can we get in by then, and then that can also lead to kind of overstuffing it. Eyes are bigger than your stomach when it's like, now we can't deliver all that, or we miss dates, or things aren't stable, or they
Yeah.
wind up being buggy. New ways we're looking at it that I think are really good, the production team has come up with, is about just putting a bunch of features that we think have promise in different stages of development, but then reviewing them as they're being developed to say, like, are these going to be ready to include, versus saying these have to be done by this date.
Yeah.
And so that's a new method that we're working out.
Hmm.
And so I can't say we are always doing it or always have done it, but it's that mix of moving off of a deadline orientation of we're just going to arbitrarily have the date, or the spring, summer, fall, update, seasonal kind of thing,
Yeah.
and declare that these things must be in it, versus let's talk about what the game should have and what we really want to put in it, and then make sure that we're developing those to good quality and good stability, and then when you have that, say, okay, well, which parts or which updates is it going to be ready to include in.
Yeah.
So that's how that's just
Okay.
shifting and evolving
All
for
right.
us.
And you talked a little about production, and this is
Mhm.
the over talked word AI. Where does AI fit into? Because you got AI where it can go into possibly the art or art aspect of things and whatnot. Where do you guys look? How do you guys look at AI as a tool or an asset?
We don't use it at all,
Yeah.
and in fact, currently we consider it a liability.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of legal stuff that's going on with AI copyright and the generation of content, and what is that, and where do the AI sample things from? Are you taking, plagiarizing, stealing other people's work, essentially being all the inflammatory words? And so currently
Right.
we don't use AI for the generation of any content.
Yeah.
And that's a hot ticket,
Right.
item in the industry to try and pin anyone down on, especially if they're going to defend using it, because
Yeah.
then you get into what are the ethics, what are the laws, and what is the impact to a staff, or to the
Exactly.
craftsmanship and the heart and soul that goes into a thing being made.
Yeah, those are the right there, the heart and soul. That's what
Yeah,
the artist is. It's you
yeah, yeah,
lose that when you start looking at AI, and
yep.
some places look at it as like, well, we just can reduce costs and we can use AI, but you lose something when you do that.
Yeah, so that's our line is no AI generation, no generative stuff,
Yeah,
with those different pieces, and so,
cool.
but definitely, hot ticket,
Yeah,
hot topic. A lot of
absolutely.
passion, a lot of religion on both sides of that argument.
Yes. So now, what do you think is key to building a strong gaming community around Hunt Showdown?
Mhm. Um, I mean, the product, the regular updates to the product, I think transparency is pretty key too, about why we're doing things or what we're doing. Why is the most important thing in any conversation, especially about change.
Hmm.
Listening, observing, and then also balancing all of that against the data of who's actually playing, and what's happening there, because you can, like you've talked about, loud vocal minorities, versus the masses of players who will never tweet, say anything, never go to Reddit, might not even know what Reddit is.
Yeah,
Like, you can still have hundreds of thousands or even millions of players who have never once clicked a link on Reddit, or never once tweeted a thought about anything.
yeah,
And for addressing that size of market, you wind up having to look at the data, and it can be shocking. Like, when people would be like, we'll have this sometimes among some of our core players and most influential partners and stuff, where they'll be like, this trade is absolute garbage, and these will be conversations that people want to have.
right.
And then we'll be like, well, the data shows it as, the fifth most used trade out of 37.
Yep,
And it's like, and it's like, it makes no sense for a top 1% elite pro player, but
exactly.
it makes all the sense in the world to the average player out there who does
Hmm.
get value and utility and benefit out of doing this. And
Yeah.
so there's things there, and then I think the key there is not to just tell people you're wrong. Like, the key is to be like, well, let me help you understand
Hmm.
what the data looks like for all these big products. And then the other part is not just dismissing stuff outright, but if somebody has a position that's completely contrary to what we hold as a team, or someone holds as an individual, is just to say, okay, well, help me understand your position, because
Yeah.
at face value I don't get it, or as presented, I don't understand it. Help me understand what it is you're really after here.
Yeah.
So, two-way things there. I think being involved, I think, I play a lot with streamers like you
Mm-hmm.
said, like you're even talking to me because there's a streamer that I
Right.
know that I play with pretty regularly. So we're in the stream chats. We do read Reddit. We do read the tweets. We do read our Discord. That's the number of DMs I'll get from people that are like, "Hey, Mr. Fifield, I just need to tell you about all my ideas for the game." And it's like, look, there's a Discord place to just post all your ideas. It's like, yeah, but no one ever reads that or responds to it. It's like, no, we read all of it. We just don't respond to all of it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then you'll get into the like, oh, you never listen to anything. And it's like, well, we listen to everything. We just don't agree with
Yeah.
everything. And listen and agree are sometimes tricky words when people are feeling ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Or they feel like they have a clear mandate from the masses, or them and their 90 friends is
Yeah.
like an undeniable majority. And it's like, well, I'm dealing in millions of
Right.
people. So,
Yeah. Well, that's something that, as a game developer, you're balancing, like you were talking about, the millions of people on Reddit and maybe that 1%er who's that streamer, which you always see people complain is like, oh, the streamers
yep.
are, they want these changes, but that's really for the 1%er. And now you've got to balance, it's not an easy job to do to try to make everybody happy.
No, and I mean, we have our Night of the Hunter partner program, so those streamers who are officially partnered with us, and they are great. Like again, that's what I'm saying. I have great dialogues with them, and that was part of my strategy coming in. It was last January I got more involved with it. I started in July, but was working on a lot of stuff of just the raw mechanics of the team and production and things
Hmm.
like that. And so then getting to know streamers, getting to know that influencer. A lot of them hate being called influencers. They just
Yeah.
they're content creators and
Right.
they put out content that they want to make. But they do have influence, and so I think that's where it's having good dialogues. Lurking their channels to see what they think or the chat thinks, engaging, going on stream to take questions directly. All that's important, and I
Yeah.
love talking to them. I love playing with them. I count many of them as friends.
Yeah, it's me as an outsider. It seems like it's a very positive environment. The creators I've talked to from the hunt space are just all
Hmm.
good people, and it's
Hmm.
just it's a good space to be in.
Feels that way. Yeah, I mean I'm happy with it. So
Yeah,
I'd like to keep seeing that grow, and it's
yeah,
there's a partnership with them, and then it's a partnership with the community because it
hmm,
is the community's passion to engage the content and keep coming back that makes any of it possible.
yep. And now, any advice for that game developer that may be watching is like, hey, how do where do I start? How do I if I want to get into this gaming industry? You applied to an ad that nobody will ever go through that process anymore.
Yeah, probably no more newspaper ads, in
Right.
handwritten letters. I mean, my biggest thing that I tell people, considering the access to tools and software that are out there today, is you have to make something.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't a please understand I have brilliant ideas. If you only hired me, I'd help you think up great things. It's like, go make something. Unity,
Hmm.
download the public version of CryEngine, download the public versions of Unity, Unreal. You can make a thing if you want to be a designer. If you want
Yeah.
to be a writer, you write stories, get published, write a 10-page story, write,
Hmm.
whatever that kind of starts to convey and show it. If you're an artist, you have to have a portfolio.
Yep.
There's no substitute for having a portfolio or an art station. Have a YouTube animation reel, have a YouTube channel, make videos. Like again, if someone was like, "Hey, I want to be on your editorial staff. I want to help you understand what's going on in the game industry and what your competition looks like, and I want to be an in-house editorial advisor." I'm like, "Well, then I expect that you have a YouTube channel with at least 30,000 subscribers where
Hmm.
you are editorializing video games."
Yep.
And it's like that isn't a convince me to hire you having produced nothing. That's all the tools are just a mouse click away. You'll
Yeah.
have to put in that time. And there's a lot of great educational programs out there now. Like when I started, there was no game design degree, there was no Full Sail University, there was
Hmm.
no Guildhall, there was no Carnegie Mellon. Those all exist now. And so
Yeah.
you can get a degree in this if you want to go the formal education route. But I've had crackerjack amazing employees that I brought in with no degree who had no experience, and all they did was build a Call of Duty level in the public version of
Hmm.
Radiant from COD, uh, original COD, Modern War One, way back in the early 2000s. That's a public set of tools that's close enough to the modern Radiant
Hmm.
engine stuff that we were like, hey, we'll take anybody entry level, no experience needed. We got 300 applications, and we were like, put 40 hours into building this specific level, and only 15 people returned a level.
Yeah.
I took the 3 best levels and I hired them.
Mhm.
Like, what multiple people out of those waves of entry level have gone on to be lead level designers,
Yeah.
on high profile AAA games across all the
Mhm.
top shooters we've already discussed. They're out there. Some of those came in through that program at Raven, zero experience, downloaded a tool set and built a level for us
Yeah.
as a sample.
Well,
So
and
make
that's
something. That's it.
well, exactly. To like, it's not like you have to go to school to do it. There's enough tools out there, enough YouTube videos you can figure out, and
Yeah.
if you're creative enough and you got the sense to do it, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yep.
Yep. And then QA, that's my other one. I came in through QA. I advocate, like, there are a lot of entry level QA jobs and people compete for those too, but that's a great one to be getting signed up for.
Okay, excellent. And now, over your vast career, some great, great games you've been involved with. Anything that sticks out as, you look back, it's like, wow, I can't believe we did that, or I did that, I was a part of this.
I think, some of the ones I was most, that, again, they're just kind of watershed moments for me would
Yeah.
be, like MechWarrior 2, or sorry, MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries. Like that one was that was the fourth of four that we were doing for Microsoft. Everything really came together. Just, had a cool vision for it, had mature tools, had a lot of mechs and a lot of, backlog of weapons and vehicles that were already available. So that was kind of the, the masterpiece of that series in my mind. So, that one means a lot. And then I think, um, just being, in Call of Duty, like that's certainly kind of like that feels like, for any other game, not to disparage or berate the other games, is like
Right.
that felt like, oh, we're making and shipping Call of Duty maps for like Modern Warfare 3. And that's like, oh yeah, this isn't the minor leagues, this is the majors. Like
Exactly.
I've
Yeah.
I've gone from the Middleton Mallards to like facing off against the Red Sox. And it's
Right.
like, that's just that different threshold of things to
Yeah.
be in that Call of Duty business unit.
Awesome.
Yeah, so those were big ones that stood
Cool.
out for me.
And now, what does the future look like for you and for Hunt, the next couple of years, at least?
Uh, yeah, continuing to evolve and grow the service, like we've talked about in our roadmap videos. We have a major initiative for next year with the engine upgrade. So, Hunt, instead of we're not doing a Hunt 2. Like, this is a thing we've said. A lot of people ask. It's like we're upgrading Hunt and continuing to run it as a service,
Yeah.
and we're doing it with an engine upgrade, which most companies might have made the play to be like, well, now we're going to call it Hunt 2, and it's a completely new game, and it's a
Hmm.
new download, and it's a new purchase, and get ready for all new inventories and microtransactions. But
Yeah.
that's not going to be our strategy with it. We're saying we want to run Hunt Showdown for another 5 years, but our engine is 4 to 5 years old,
Yeah.
so we need to take and integrate, an updated version of the engine to stay visually relevant and to keep showing off the world at that fidelity we want to. So that's the biggest thing coming in 2024.
Yeah.
And then just making more content faster to get the battle passes out, to see what it takes. We have a new map that we've announced will come next year, so that's exciting, and that's a big thing. And then trying to increase that pace for maps and for having the boss monsters, the targets that we created. We had a wild target, it's kind of a new version of it,
Hmm.
that came out, and we just want to do those with more frequency, keep telling cool, creepy stories, in the turn of the century, 19th,
Yeah.
century, 1895 time zone. And yeah, we think we can do that for years. It's just a
Excellent.
matter of doing it with the right pace and cadence and hitting targets at quality.
Yeah. And now, you speaking of stories and whatnot, any solo thing coming down the road, or
We
talks
talk
of that?
about it,
Yeah.
and that's, sometimes we hint at that, where I do say, like, my role is not the general manager of Hunt Showdown, it's the general manager of the Hunt franchise. And
Yeah.
so that includes transmedia, or if we were doing stuff that would branch out to other product lines or entertainment forms,
Yeah.
and if we were to do other products in the Hunt universe that, are gaming products, that would be
Yeah.
also under my purview. But we haven't
Okay.
announced any full new titles,
Yeah.
other than to say, those are things we explore and consider. We do look at Hunt as a franchise and not just one game.
Nice. And I'm sure you get asked this a lot because, Sigma is one of my friends from Evasion and
Oh,
tournaments and
sure.
things like
Yeah, we
that.
just did the Bayou Bowl with her in Death, and
Exactly.
yeah, that was fun. They're great people. Mad respect for Sigma and Hotel Bravo and
Yeah.
those folks. That was a really fun experience that we just ran with them.
Yeah. So any tools or any abilities for them to, not for them, but just in general to do tournaments or anything like that?
It's a topic we want to have because I think they did the best that they could with the tools that we had, and
Yeah.
they circled in on Soul Survivor, which was the right decision for that Bayou Bowl. But of course, we all know we could do more if we get custom lobbies. We all know we could do more if we had private servers or things
Yeah.
like that. And so those are things that we're talking about. And I've spoken before when people ask about it during like roadmap Q&A that it's like,
Yeah.
are we doing it? The answer is, well, it is near and dear to our heart, and it is a thing we understand the value of and are working towards, but I don't have it on a roadmap
Yeah.
that I can tell you, yeah, Q2 of 2024,
Right.
custom lobby. Like, I can't say that, so don't
Yeah.
edit that in any horrible way.
No.
Like, so this is but that's what everybody wants us to say, right? And that's
Yeah.
the one of the other things that we want to be better at Crytek and at Hunt is in the past we've done a lot of speculation about features we'd like to do but we
Hmm.
don't actually deliver, right? And then it became like, you said on your roadmap you'd give nightmare mode, or you said on your roadmap
Yeah.
you were doing 2D replay, and it's like we were legitimately trying to consider how that might get made or get done, but they didn't happen. They didn't have target rock solid dates, and they don't even have the rock solid tech.
Yeah.
And so while we were speculating on things we'd like to do that are fun and exciting, and that's accurate, and that can get the audience excited too to know, oh, they're thinking about it,
Right.
it kind of came across as like, we're doing this. And then when a developer says we're doing this, well, it's pretty reasonable for the audience to
Yeah.
expect it's going to come out.
It's written in
And
stone.
so,
It's done. It's going to happen.
yeah, and so I want to be careful about, like, if we talk about it in a roadmap video, we're doing it, and I'm committing to dates that players can expect, or people
Yeah.
like yourself can build content around.
Yeah.
They've announced this, and I wonder what it'll be like, or whatever. But some of those other ones, like Nightmare Mode, 2D Replay, and even custom lobbies, is like, would be awesome. Not sure where it fits in the schedule or exactly
Right.
when it comes along. So, want you to understand we agree with you when you say it's great, but don't confuse that for it's coming out next year.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, and that's where some of those live. But I'd love to get the answer together for what, even more competitive, organized play can look
Yeah.
like. Would love to figure out what our next collaborations can be with folks like Evasion and Death and all
Yeah.
those folks and that. But right now, we don't have things we can announce or
Yeah.
bank on.
Yeah, that was the first exposure I got to Death was his Monday Night Hunt series, and he had me on,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that was a blast. What a great
yeah.
guy he is.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely. A lot of fun there.
yeah. So now, when you're not playing Hunt, you're not, managing the game itself. What do you do away from the computer?
Oh, no, that's kind of it. I kind of make Hunt and I play Hunt, and then I got my 6 kids of varying ages, 3
Yeah.
of them still at home and 3 of them have moved out. I have 1 grandson in town,
Oh, nice.
so there's those pieces too. But yeah, I'd say in the last couple of years, it's been make Hunt, play some other titles here and there.
Yeah.
A lot of travel between here and Europe, so it's a
Excellent.
pretty calendar filling endeavor for now.
And you seem happy, and that's important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's that's the whole. If you do a thing you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Is
Very
that
true.
an old proverb there? And yeah, I absolutely love Hunt. I love talking about Hunt. Like this is there's parts of making Hunt or development that can get hard and frustrating and angry and
Yeah.
all those different pieces. Talking about it's my favorite thing. I think is what you're really picking up on, and
Hmm.
certainly playing it. Play on stream. Love to play with people. Love to take it for the fun that it gives. Don't get so angry or wound up in different levels of performance. Like I expect to die more than I expect to kill people,
Hmm. Yeah.
but that just makes the kills I do get all the sweeter.
Exactly.
Lose more than I win, but that's just the thrill of victory heightened by the volume of loss leading up to the moments before it. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's good. And I'm definitely blessed and fortunate to be working on a game I absolutely love, with an amazing team that's had their heart and soul into it for so long, and that this thing even existed before I came along. And,
Yeah.
that's an important thing to note in all this is, I joined a year and a half ago. This thing's been kicking ass for 5 years.
Yeah.
And is on had a great foundation to then grow even further from. So,
Well,
all those are
it's
good things to be happy about, all things considered, of all the games I could be on, all the things that are going on in the industry. Yeah, this life is good.
excellent. Well, like I was saying, I think it's like 18 months ago, a year ago, you saw that
Yeah,
traction go up, and I think that's
yeah,
probably a large part to your involvement.
Well, I think it's a continuation because
Yeah.
again, if you were seeing it 18 months ago, I wouldn't have even joined yet.
Yeah.
And again, some of that's what got my attention, like things that they had done with Scrapbeak in the third year, things that they had done with the Christmas event when Devil's Advocate came out. Like I did that all as a fan. I
Yeah.
wasn't here, and so those were moments that saw pretty steep rises in Hunt's popularity.
Hmm.
That pulled me in as a fan when one of my kids even was, it was like one of my adult sons was like, "Hey, come play this," and I got into it with him, and we started playing that way. So a lot of Hunt's leap and jump upwards was that predates me, and then
Yeah.
I've just been trying to keep it going and not screw it up, and also help it. One area we talk about that I would even put out here is like we do see a big area to improve on consoles, and we've been quiet on it. We don't always address it. We do acknowledge it. I've gone on Twitter to apologize for
Hmm.
the last time when we failed to ship it at the same time and they had to wait 2 weeks for that event. Like I see that as a big area for us to improve,
Hmm.
and that's something I have a strong background in, is games that are both on PC and console. And that's an area where we definitely have a lot of room to improve. We know it. We're committed to doing it. And that's a thing that I'll be proud to be part of the team that makes that happen.
And now, from a console standpoint in PC, where's I got to assume the larger number of you gamers are probably on the PC side, or is it getting close on console?
Right now it's mixed,
Yeah.
in a not great ratio, and that's the point. Is we should have more players on console than we do, given the success of PC.
Yeah.
But there's clear reasons that we don't, which is just we have under-delivered for the console experience, and we have put it out late, and at a lower quality than what the PC people are used to. And
Yeah.
so again, that's one of our strong commitments going forward, is to make that better. And we owe the console users proof behind those pleasant words because,
Yeah.
as of this moment, we haven't fully delivered on that, and we need to.
Your name, Buckwild. Where does it come from?
That was the name of my tank
Ah,
in
okay.
Desert Storm. So yeah, it's not the MTV show or nothing to do with knocking boots. It's that is the name of my Abrams tank from Desert Storm was Buckwild.
Excellent. All right. Well, David, you survived the podcast.
I did.
You did.
Phew.
It's done. The weight's off your
Excellent.
shoulder. All right. Well, thank you again, sir, and have a
Yeah.
wonderful day.
You as well. Thank you.